Hi, thank you for tuning into the Emerging Themes video series. I'm Emma Nugent, Information Sharing Project Officer at the Centre for Excellence in Child and Family Welfare. I begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet. For me, it's the Wurundjeri land of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. I acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. The Emerging Themes video series seeks to deliver complex information and topics related to the Multi-Agency Risk Assessment and Management Framework, otherwise known as MARIM, and the information sharing schemes through interesting and easily digestible presentations and conversations. This video series is funded through the MARIM Framework Sector Capacity Building Project. Today we're hearing from Dr. Heidi Saunders, clinical psychologist and senior practitioner at Carinity Talera. Dr. Heidi Saunders is a clinical psychologist and senior practitioner at Carinity Talera, a service that provides medium to long-term trauma recovery therapy for children and young people, along with their protective caregivers following the experience of domestic and family violence. Dr. Saunders is also the DFV program coordinator at Carinity Talera and has a key role with both the DFV counselling program and the Renew program, which involves trauma and attachment-based therapy for families where a young male person is using various forms of violence or power and control, also known as adolescent to parent violence, toward the female protective caregiver in the home. Dr. Saunders also provides clinical supervision to therapists working in the above therapeutic context and teaches within the psychology and counselling degrees at the Queensland University of Technology. Today, Heidi will be speaking about safe and effective engagement with young people in the context of domestic and family violence. Thank you, Heidi.
Thank you, Emma, and thank you everyone for tuning in to this video. My aim in this video is to discuss how to create a safe space to effectively engage with young people who've experienced trauma from the context of domestic and family violence. Before continuing, I would like to begin by first acknowledging the traditional custodians of the various lands from which this video is viewed, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who choose to watch this video. I would also like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. There are two stages to this video. Firstly, we will focus on understanding the nature of historical and current contexts that young people experience that develops their sense of being unsafe in the world, as this is a key consideration when determining how to effectively engage with young people. We will then briefly focus on how a sense of safety can be developed with a young person from a theoretical perspective, before then spending most time on approaches to implement to support this goal of safety. Overall, it will be useful to hold in mind that once a young person experiences an increased sense of safety with their own emotional experiences and in the context of other safe people, they are more likely to be connected to their authentic sense of self and their needs. In turn, this clarity can then make it easier for the young person to express themselves verbally or non-verbally. It is first important to acknowledge the wide range of behaviours from a person using violence that contribute to the overall lived experience of domestic and family violence and contribute to trauma for young people. These are listed on the slide. Exposure to DFV involves experiences during significant events, such as hearing the violence or intervening with the violence. Experiences between significant events, such as being forced to spy on a parent or being told they are to blame for the violence. And experiences after major events, such as seeing injuries or having to call for emergency assistance. It is vital to recognise that witnessing violence has the same impact as being the direct recipient of it. Being trauma-informed when interacting or working with young people experiencing trauma is different, depending on the type of trauma. As you can see on the slide, single event trauma can occur from experiences such as car accidents or natural disasters, and can develop into post-traumatic stress disorder. whereas complex trauma develops in the context of relationships where the trauma is ongoing. Further factors regarding the context of domestic and family violence that are important to consider is that the young person is less likely to have adults present to help them understand and contain their responses to the trauma. And the adults are likely to betray the trust with young people by leaving out or amending information about the situation. Furthermore, domestic and family violence undermines the relationship between the young person and their mother. And in many cases, the young person generally has to maintain an ongoing dependency with the person using violence. Overall, these factors highlight the difficulty with key relationships with adults that contribute to the young person's belief that others are unsafe. It is therefore important to provide alternative, safe experiences to young people. A key part of safe and effective engagement with young people is being able to assess whether they are experiencing complex trauma, and if so, identify the behaviours and indicators for this, as this can guide decision-making with engagement with the young person. Some key effects are listed on the slide, with particular emphasis on a young person's reduced sense of safety with their own internal states, their experience of others, and view of the world. Effects of complex trauma are lifelong and across all contexts, such as school, home, social relationships, engaging in hobbies, or engaging in support services. Now, moving into focusing on how to build a sense of safety with a young person. The slide outlines a neurodevelopmental approach, which is a broad model that assists with determining a young person's current experience with their internal states and others in their life. Young people with complex trauma will present a need for us to first support their emotion regulation, which, depending on the severity of their trauma, can be a gradual process. This is the regulate stage of the model at the bottom. Once they are able to regulate and feel safer with their internal states, they have more capacity for the relate stage, where they attend to others. This is in the middle of the model. Here, there is more space to work on connecting with a young person in a safe, empathic relationship to help their sense of safety with others. This helps to regulate the young person across further contexts. The reason stage at the top of the model is the stage where young people are most effectively able to be present, use their cognitive capacity to communicate, and develop and express their sense of self. In any instance of engaging with a young person or across a longer period of time working with them, it is therefore important to recognise where a young person sits in this model and work from that point, then up the model. It is useful to consider that a young person can move back down to the need to focus on regulation. This can be in the context of significant life changes in relationships or other transitions and challenges. I'll now start by discussing approaches to trauma-informed support that can be used across all contexts, no matter how long you've been working with a young person or you are going to work with a young person. I'll then move into guidance for longer-term therapeutic intervention. Firstly, it's important to hold in mind that no matter the duration of your work with a young person, the focus on regulating their emotional experience and the relationship you have with them will help increase their sense of safety and effective engagement. The environment or context you meet with the young person is also important, as the young person will always automatically scan the environment for signs of safety because they are chronically feeling unsafe. Increasing sense of safety can come from allowing the young person to choose their environment where possible. However, where this is not possible, it is useful to focus on an element of choice in the environment that may relate to options for games, toys, deciding what to talk about, or a choice of a snack or drink. Additionally, ensuring consistency in the environment, such as using the same room if it's therapy, having the same toys, games, and other items present each week in a support environment or therapeutic environment if there is ongoing work with the young person. In the regulating and relating stages of the neurodevelopmental approach, it is key to be non-directive and follow the young person's lead to discover elements of their world first. Attending to both their verbal and non-verbal communication is useful to help with understanding themes in their experience and allows you to respond to and validate emotional experiences. This ensures an overall sense of safety is being developed over time. For instance, a young person may experience a change in response to sensory stimulation, such as noise or sights, which may trigger a traumatic response. This can lead to them under-responding, such as becoming numb or withdrawn, or over-responding, such as heightened emotions or dysregulated behaviour. And it is likely that the young person would not be able to verbally express these changes, so a focus on their non-verbals would be beneficial here. Finally, the internal stance and perspective we take has an influence on how we express ourselves as a safe person. Viewing each young person's behaviours or symptoms or actions from a whole child perspective means we see these experiences as a child adapting to an adverse environment or an adverse history, which helps us remain in a state of empathy that assists with regulating and relating to a young person, further building a sense of safety. Further focus on creating a sense of safety with young people is to keep in mind that their history of maltreatment and relationships can cause them to see safe adults and services as unsafe. So additional ways to build a sense of safety is to be mindful of your tone of voice, facial expressions, non-verbal movements, and posture and stance, and how this matches with the young person. For instance, if they are showing some flat affect, we can be more calm in our response. And if they are more enthusiastic, we would show more animated responses. It is also useful to hold in mind that a young person with complex trauma is more likely to interpret neutral non-verbals as negative. And some young people will experience fear in response to positive affect, as they are typically in a state of hypervigilance and have had experiences of mistrust in the past with adults. A sense of safety for a young person also builds when a safe adult sets gentle and clear boundaries that are consistent. For example, saying to a young person, "We can definitely grab a basketball, but we'll need to wait until we're outside to bounce it." This provides a sense of predictability and communicates to the young person that we have a focus on keeping things safe. Finally, consistency and predictability can also be targeted by organising appointments to be at clear times, sticking to the time and duration of the planned appointment, and maintaining a consistent appointment time if it is ongoing therapeutic intervention. Maintaining a similar routine within a session or appointment also helps with predictability, such as meeting in the reception area, getting the young person to choose a snack, then moving into the therapy room before Then doing a check-in regarding current emotional state, which might be a visual check-in or verbal check-in, depending on the young person. And then allowing the young person to choose what to do or focus on, and so on. The PACE model outlines a specific approach to allow young people to have a voice, to feel seen, and to feel heard. This is outlined on the slide. Playfulness involves creating an atmosphere of lightness and interest with the young person. This approach can help building the relationship and diffusing a difficult situation. It can also help with young people who have challenges with regulating strong emotions, such as excitement or joy. Unconditional acceptance is key to a young person's sense of safety. It involves communicating to the young person that you recognize and accept underlying wishes, feelings, thoughts, and motives of their external behavior or actions. Curiosity involves the process of reflecting about the meaning behind a young person's actions, such as, what do you think was going on? What do you think that was about? Or, I wonder what was happening for you there. To help them to start reflecting on their inner life and to stay engaged in conversations while feeling heard. This also helps the process of increasing the young person's communication about their needs over time. Empathy maintains the expression of compassion toward the young person through use of reflecting feeling, such as, I can see that's a big feeling for you, or that seems like a hard feeling, which shows that the safe adult will be there with the young person during good and hard times. This slide demonstrates the window of tolerance, which can be used to track where a young person is with their emotional experience. Whether this is specifically identified by the young person after you introduce the model at a relevant stage, or it is simply noted by your observations. Either way, this can help to guide what the young person needs to return to a more regulated state, which is the optimal level of functioning in the middle of the diagram. If they are either hyper-aroused at the top of the window or hypo-aroused at the bottom of the window, that's when being able to identify that can be useful to then bring the young person back into their optimal level of functioning. It is useful to hold in mind that this optimal level of functioning can be narrowed for a young person with complex trauma, as their body's stress systems may be excessively and repeatedly activated, which interrupts the ability for a young person to regulate their stress response. This results in their optimal level of functioning to be narrowed and for their responses to stress to be blunted or exaggerated. Being able to help a young person identify their current state and return to a regulated state gradually increases this window of optimal functioning and their capacity to stay within that window. This can then help them move up in the neurodevelopmental model and be able to feel safer within their bodies and be able to attend more to their surroundings and their relationships. Now, moving into more specific focus on trauma-specific therapeutic intervention, the first step in this process is to ensure a young person is prepared for therapeutic intervention. The slide outlines considerations to hold in mind when deciding whether a young person is ready to be referred or to start trauma-specific therapy. So you might hold this in mind if you're not working in trauma-specific therapy, if you are going to refer a young person or family, hold these, or you may hold these factors in mind if you're working in a trauma-specific space when deciding whether a young person is ready to start or they need some more safety and stability first. These factors are important as when safe or unstable, people are unable to experience the biological changes to the stress response system needed for greater recovery from trauma-related symptoms. In this context, effective engagement is difficult or impossible and can then instead contribute to an increased sense of the young person feeling unsafe instead. So overall, if you can't do anything else, provide emotional, psychological, and physical safety and stability until it is the right time. There is a lot that can be covered when discussing long-term therapy, and I'll cover some of the key points now. It is important to consider a young person's developmental age rather than their chronological age when determining the focus of therapy. This can be best guided by the neurodevelopmental approach outlined earlier and the stage that the young person is on this. It is useful to hold in mind that a young person can experience regression as well. So you may see different developmental presentations within the one interaction with the young person. This is where it is important to use the PACE model to follow the young person's lead and help with regulation before anything else. Beginning at the regulate part of the neurodevelopmental approach is important, as if a young person is in a state of being led by the survival and emotional parts of the brain, very little information can get passed up to the higher parts of their brain where they're able to think clearly and process information. So establishing safety and competence involves directing a young person's focus to pursuits that move away from trauma-related triggers and that instead give them a sense of pleasure and mastery over time. Repetitive experiences of safety, predictability, and fun support co-regulation and help a young person to develop more independence with this skill of regulating. This stage of interaction is likely to have more nonverbal communication and expression from the young person, who can benefit from support with repetitive and predictable engagement in rhythmic activities, as these regulate the young person's physical experience through lower order areas of the brain. This can involve walking, dancing, running, drumming, tapping, playing instruments, bouncing a ball, singing, guided breathing, and listening to music. Once this repeated experience contributes to more emotion and physical regulation, there can be even more meaningful focus on the young person having an experience of a safe relationship with you. It's important to hold in mind that complex trauma happens in the context of relationships, so the healing has to occur through relationships. The working relationship you have with a young person can serve as a template for healthy future relationships. So helping them with feeling safe, being able to communicate just to you, even to start with, providing a space of acceptance and curiosity, and maintaining consistent boundaries are key parts of ongoing therapy. More capacity for regulating and relating to others then helps move the young person into more specific intervention or support that can involve problem solving, reflective processes, building a sense of self-concept, becoming aware of strengths, engaging more in various areas of life, and adjusting the challenges they come across. The young person can begin to build more balance between independence and safe connection with others. And this, getting to that point, can take years. It really depends on what happens in the young person's life as they're engaging with you over weeks or months or years. There's so many factors to take into account, and staying at the young person's point on the neurodevelopmental model approach will always help them to regulate and relate and recover from adversity. Additionally, It is preferable to work with a young person's system to ensure their interconnected needs are in focus and can be addressed. Elements of a young person's system can include their broader family, school, child safety system, social or care support, medical and health support, and so on. Systems can support one another with being trauma-informed through collaborative education that is specific to a young person or more generalised to being trauma-informed in their overall approach. A cohesive system for a young person will ensure that the young person remains engaged and they build a positive attitude towards help seeking in their current state and in their future moving into adulthood. As part of their system, parents or caregivers play a key role in a young person's engagement. This can be through providing education regarding trauma and managing a young person's needs with parents, such as introducing the PACE model or the window of tolerance, as I covered in this presentation. It can be useful to focus on positive attachment-based processes between the child and their protective caregiver to help with co-regulation and safe relationship building outside of professional support systems. This can take time to develop independence for the young person and their protective caregiver to do this, and can always start with this active support of a worker, of a professional worker. So this can occur with you to help them eventually take a more independent approach with this. Overall, it is key to ensure the young person remains visible when working with the protective caregiver by holding in mind the following considerations. That this gives you an opportunity to model responses that are empathic, curious, and accepting of the young person when responding to their emotions or needs in front of the protective caregiver. Modeling can be very important and very useful. Following a dynamic where the young person is able to speak first, and boundaries may need to be put in place with the caregiver. So it can be something along the lines of, I can hear, what you have to say there is so important. I really want to hear it, but I want to hear from young person first to make sure I'm hearing all perspectives. You may also get permission within a session process or an appointment process from the young person to ask the parent questions, or talk to the parents. Like, I hear what you're saying, and I can hear that it was really hard for you. Do you mind if I ask, mum, a couple of questions about that? Asking the parent or the young person, this is dependent on context. How do you feel about what mum said, or how do you feel about what your son said here? To make sure that, either this, the young person's perspective is being reflected on in the context of the work by the protective caregiver, or the young person's perspective is being heard about what, their parent or caregiver has said. Certainly asking, and this is individually, asking the young person what they feel comfortable with sharing or definitely don't want to share, to give them a voice. In any way, big or small, giving the young person the choice and input in decision making. Using silence if a young person is taking time to express themselves, or if they are doing so non-verbally in some way, using silence and giving that space. And that again will model to the protective caregiver that giving space for even non-verbal expression is so important as well. And there may be times as well where, the PACE model, the skills of helping to co-regulate may need to be used with the parent as well, either individually before maybe a co-session with the young person, or in the session as well, ensuring you validate them as well if things are getting quite difficult for the protective caregiver, but always then emphasizing, I'm hearing this and I also want to hear from the young person here. So here I've listed some key references to support the content from this video. Thank you so much for listening, and all the best with your ongoing work with young people and their families.
Thank you, Heidi, for such an insightful and informative presentation. You've certainly highlighted how crucial safe engagement with young people is and the importance of keeping young people in view and heard through a series of different approaches, as well as providing such valuable tips on how practitioners can work to ensure young people are being supported effectively. To find more information and resources about Merriman information sharing schemes, please see the Centre's Merriman Information Sharing Resource Hub. Thank you again for your presentation, Heidi, and thank you to our viewers for tuning in.
Thank you.